There we go. So some of you may have noticed that we took a little break in August. We've been running these monthly networks since the beginning of COVID, but we took a break in August. I would like to say that we took a break to have a nice, relaxing summer, but we've been very busy helping housing co-ops to raise loan stock to buy their properties, helping groups to submit planning applications, helping groups to find land. So it's been a busy couple of months for us, but we're glad to be back with a bang for September and the new school year, I suppose. And this session will be focusing on second homes. So I'm sure that many of you have taken the opportunity to holiday throughout the summer, and it's been another summer of staycation in the UK. And this has caused a rise in second homes and holiday homes in some parts of Wales, particularly in Gwynedd and Pembrokeshire, which is driving up property prices and reducing housing stock, forcing some locals out of their local communities and making home ownership, even renting a property, impossible for many. So combined with the increased demand for rural living as a result of more people working from home, it seems like getting on the property ladder has never been more difficult. We really feel that community-led housing can be part of the solution to this second home crisis. People taking a leading and lasting role in housing delivery and greater control over their housing stock will lead to more active, cohesive and resilient communities, in our opinion. So we're really delighted today to be joined by two community-led housing projects that have done just this. They've taken back control of the housing stock in their communities. So to kick us off, we've got Andrew George, Director of Cornwall CLT, and he'll be giving us an overview of the situation in Cornwall and what they've done as a community land trust to address the issues. That will be followed by Peter Ravelry, who is Chair of Appledore CLT in Devon, and they'll be sharing their experiences of working with a housing association to deliver more affordable housing for local people. So thank you both for joining us today. Really excited to hear about what you've been doing in your respective communities. So Andrew, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Casey. Or rather, Ddatblygu, Fadlagenis, Mynaf in the Cartrefi Saesneg. So yeah, well, we have a language similar to your own here in Cornwall. We were sometimes, I think in the past, known as West Wales. And we were divided by the Saxons, I think, just a few years ago, but we still like to keep our good relations with our Welsh cousins. And our language is similar, although you wouldn't know it. I think you probably have to kind of read it to be able to see the similarities. Anyway, moving on to the subject of housing and Cornwall Community Land Trust. What I'll do is I will attempt to share my screen for a moment. It's going to take. I'm fairly kind of clunky, and as a naturally quill, pen, and parchment man myself, I just need to. It takes me a while to kind of do these things. So, oh dear, no, not now. Yeah, me. From the beginning. Here we go. So, can you see that? It's got the right date and the right group, hopefully, and the right presentation. Yeah. I've thrown this one together rather hurriedly because I was just explaining to Casey, Peter, earlier that that we're, I mean, excitingly, but it's been a bare knuckle ride over the last 24 hours. Just we're doing a handover of 6 affordable rent homes down on the Lizard at Ruin Minor, and I see that Andrew Prendergast is with us. He may recollect when he was working in Cornwall being associated with some of the work that he'll be looking at today. Good to see you, Andrew. So what I'll do is of course the issue of second home ownership and the policy context of second home ownership is one which is obviously significantly, how can I put it, draws you into kind of partisan politics. And I don't know whether you know, I don't know whether I've kind of gave you fair warning that in the past I was I am a self-confessed sleazeball, a former member of Parliament from House of Commons, and therefore did more than dabble in the politics side of what I'm going to cover. But of course, Cornwall Community Land Trust is a non-partisan and political organisation, of course, like any other charitable body, and we don't do politics ourselves, but the consequences of which, nevertheless, are or rather the consequences of second home ownership are ones that actually do create work and opportunities, I suppose, as well as challenges, of course, for community-led housing charities like our own. So just a little bit about Cornwall Community Land Trust, to give you a bit of background as to who we are, what we do. So been around since 2007, developed over 260 homes across 27 projects. The latest is today, as I've mentioned there. Mentioned some of the most recent ones that we've been engaged in. The interesting thing there is that we do a range of different models, really. I mean, I know that a lot of community land trusts tend to adopt the model of working in partnership with registered providers. We are a registered provider ourselves, so that's one change which Andrew, since you were in Cornwall, will become a registered provider and an investment partner. So for example, at Ruin Minor, the 6 which we're delivering today are 6 homes which we're delivering as an RP. So we are the landlord of those homes, and we're doing that in partnership with a local community land trust that was clearly, because it's not an RP, unable to deliver the homes themselves with public grant aid, which was essential in order to achieve the viability on that project. Other projects like at Sept, which you mentioned there, that was an entirely discounted sale project, or resale price covenant project, where we're selling the homes for little over 50% of market value, and that remains through covenant and a 106 agreement in perpetuity. And we handle the resales of those properties, whereas at Dulo, Rame and Landrake, those were different in their own way, but projects where we were working in partnership with registered providers, Coastline in the case of Rame, and Astor in the case of Landrake and Dulo. We have another project starting later this year at Mancledra, and then we have a pipeline of other projects. Got 3 planning applications in Lynivett, Newlyn, St Denis, which are due to be resolved hopefully in the next, determined in the next couple of months. And we have others there where we're along the way, and including on the Isles of Scilly, where we have planning permission for the delivery of discounted sale homes there, both on the main island, St Mary's, and one on one of the off islands. We have 2 co-housing projects which are moving along as well. That's a little bit of background. Something seems to have jumped. I don't know why that jumped like that. Well, anyway, we'll move on. Yeah. So we work with local CLTs. So there's some of them. This is one of the projects in the middle of Cornwall at St Hugh. There are 8 homes. 2 of them are rent, managed by Cornwall Rural Housing Association. And then St Minver is worth mentioning. St Minver, because I need to come back to this one later on, St Minver had 2 phases of mostly discounted sale homes, with a strong element of self-build, or at least self-finish from weatherproof, from weatherproof completions. In those cases, because this is an area, if you know North Cornwall, it's an area which is in the village of Rock, and so there's a number of local, highly sought after communities in the area, Trebetherick, Port Isaac, and so on, which are kind of well known nationally amongst people who come to Cornwall to enjoy our beaches. And the level of second home ownership in St Minver parishes, there are 2 parishes for St Minver, is close to 80%, and therefore the house prices in that area are more akin to the southeast of England than they are the former mining towns of Cornwall. So when we completed the discounted sales, the sale prices were in the lower 30% of the house prices, the open market house prices in the area. And there are other working with other CLTs. We've established 12 community land trusts. Not all of them have delivered projects so far, but many have their own way. Just a little inventory of if you like, factoids, which are worth noting. 11% of Cornwall's housing stock is social housing, for want of a better description. It depends on your definition of, and I'm sure this is the same in Wales, as to how you define in law what is or isn't a second home, but approximately 10% of all the housing stock in Cornwall is second homes. If you take the view that all holiday lets of any form are part of the housing stock, then that number increases. If you if you deduct all of the holiday lets from that number, it reduces to as little as 6%. In the last couple of years, there's been a 72% reduction in the availability of private rent, particularly since the pandemic, and there's been a more than 20% increase in rent over that period. And in fact, there's been a 15% increase in rent just in the last year. And I think Rightmove came out with a figure, I think a couple of days ago, showing that in Cornwall there's been a 345% increase in competition for the shrinking private rented market in Cornwall. And we obviously know of a lot of cases currently at the moment where families are in extremely insecure housing and facing eviction at the moment, and there is nowhere else for them to go. I'm sure there are very similar circumstances in Wales. The post-lockdown staycation impact in Cornwall has resulted in very, very significant increases in house prices. The desire for people to live in more agreeable circumstances, if they're likely to be working from home, has certainly increased. People would rather live in a rural location than a grotty flat in a town, even if that flat can generate a high market value. There's also in Cornwall, and I'm sure this is the case in Wales as well, although I think that your government has done more to address this issue. And in my previous life, wearing my hat, I was campaigning against this when it was brought in 2012. The availability for second homes to switch from council tax to business rates, that apply for small business rate relief and then pay nothing at all, so long as they make themselves available for 140 nights a year. They don't need to let their properties. They just need to show that they're available for letting for 140 nights a year. That and a number of other tax loophole kind of ruses, I suppose, are available to them, and that is also, of course, quietly driving a lot of capital investment going into second homes, even if as well as, of course, the desire to have these investment vehicles. But the figure there, the 20 million pounds per annum, is what it costs Cornwall Council to subsidise those who are taking advantage of the small business rate relief. And because they're entitled to small business rate relief, Cornwall has given over £100 million of COVID aid to recipients of small business rate relief. Sorry, that is second homeowners with who are entitled to small business rate relief, which I think a lot of people found quite shocking. Just a little bit of planning background. So we have a local plan. We have a big emphasis, of course, on affordable housing and supplementary planning document addressing that big push to get neighbourhood planning in place. We have our primary tool available to organisations like ourselves in rural areas is the rural exceptions policy. It happens to be policy 9 of Cornwall's local plan, and of course there is affordable allocation policies as well. There's a description there which I won't bore you with right now about how that the rural exceptions policy is applied in Cornwall. And then there's a role for community planning and NDP. So the local plan provides the broad guidelines under which local communities and NDPs operate. So further detailed guidance is prepared locally, and obviously neighbourhood development plans can introduce significant local detail. What we very strongly advise, although it sounds counterintuitive, is to recommend to local communities to draw their development boundaries as tightly as possible and to use the rural exceptions policy to its full extent. In those communities which haven't done that, it's been extremely difficult to secure land at affordable values because the hope value on the land is very significantly higher in those circumstances. So actually, as I say, although it sounds counterintuitive, actually having strong discouragement of development and a strong principled stance to resist open market development in these locations is particularly helpful to achieving a growth of genuinely affordable homes in communities, and that certainly are very strong advice and lessons learned. In terms of policy responses, obviously we're not pushing for any of these, and this is simply because I'm at a seminar where you're talking about this. Therefore, we're aware of the push to introduce a new use class. Wearing my old hat, going back even to the 80s, I've been encouraging the introduction of a new use class in the planning use classes order. So non-permanent occupancy would be the use class one, where an applicant who wishes to switch a home from permanent occupancy to non-permanent occupancy would need to apply for planning permission, just as they would if they wish to change that property to a factory or a shop or an office. And that would then give local authorities and local communities through their NDPs the opportunity to establish policies on the point at which the community feels that it can tolerate no more, or it's saturated, to reach saturation level of second home ownership. Obviously, such a permission would need to be applied for the lifetime of the occupancy. Otherwise, you generate a risk of it being counterproductive, in the sense that it would be in everyone's interest to apply for such a planning permission when they come to sell their properties. Then obviously closing the many, I haven't listed all of them, tax loopholes which exist, and then to establish an appropriate second home levy. It's impossible to, although a lot of people talk blithely about, well, they should be charged 5 times council tax or something. And you can't do that unless you actually define what a second home is. And the introduction of a use of a planning use class actually gives you at least a handlebar against which you can start applying such other policies as you wish, because then you can distinguish between second homes and the rest of the permanent housing stock. In terms of community-led housing responses, one of the things that we've noticed is that as evidence of the impact of second home ownership has increased in many communities. It has generated strong community motivation, not just to become upset about it, but also to respond strongly to it and to address the housing need. And it's also created more fertile ground for charitable organisations like ourselves to come to offer constructive solutions to address those problems. And also, as I was indicating earlier, in the case of Rock, St Minver, where, as I say, the discounts that we're able to offer locals are significantly greater because the impact which second homes have on the house prices in that area create the opportunity for us to construct a new significantly lower rung on the housing ladder, which then gives local people at least the opportunity to at least get their fingernails onto that lower rung, and an opportunity to move on from there. Obviously, maintaining the integrity of the policy and maintaining the in perpetuity purpose of the original permission and the project is vitally important. Therefore, handling resales is very important in those circumstances. So that's me done. So thank you, Casey. I'll stop sharing.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Really interesting to hear about the sort of policy context in Cornwall and your experiences so far. I think a lot of it is relevant to communities across Wales. And I think the discounted market sale element is really interesting and something that could be explored here. So thank you very much. We will have an opportunity to ask Andrew some questions after Peter. So keep hold of them or pop them in the chat if you think you're going to forget them, but we will come back to them. So now I'd like to introduce Peter Ravelry from the Appledore CLT, who's going to tell us a little bit about his project and about working with housing associations as well. So Peter, if you want to unmute yourself and come to the floor, that would be great. You're just on mute there, Peter. I ask you to unmute, maybe that will work.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, there we go. Fab,
yeah,
over to you.
Fine. Yeah, it's Peter Ravelry. No
I
worries.
Apologise.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure I can follow Andrew. Our organisation is quite a simple CLT. Firstly, Appledore, for those that don't know where we are or who we are, is a small coastal village on the estuary of the Torn Torridge. We're about 50 miles due southeast of Tenby, so not too far away. It's a historic port originally and a home of shipbuilding and boat building, although those, whilst we still got the shipbuilding, Appledore Shipbuilders, which is now Harland and Wolff, it's mainly a tourist destination, and with the consequent issues that's brought. Why do we start? Well, concerned that local people in the village couldn't afford to buy or rent homes here, and he was particularly concerned about members of the lifeboat and the fire service, where they were having to move out further and further. So he recruited 2 or 3 of us at the beginning to see whether we could form a CLT and try and do something to redress the balance, albeit in a small way. This was back in 2009. So we did. We had a tremendous amount of help from the Wessex Community Homes organisation, who put us in touch with solicitors, etc., to form the correct legal framework, which we did. Appledore at that time had 42% second homes. It's probably a lot more now since the pandemic. The population, the resident population, is about 2,000 people. That's during the winter. Obviously, like Cornwall, it just escalates during the summer. The pandemic has had a particular effect. As was mentioned by Andrew, particularly here, that a lot of people now realise that they can live in a nice place and still work from home and earn the same sort of salaries that they got in London or wherever, and that's fine. They are living in the village permanently. Some of these people, it's the second homes that are only occupied part of the year that are really a problem. So what did we do? Our biggest issue in Appledore was the actual availability of a site. We said we're a small village. There's very little land in the core village. There's land on the outskirts, but we were concerned that we really wanted whatever we did to be in as part of the core village. We did consider possibly buying some older properties to convert, as another local organisation had done in Holsworthy. They converted some old houses and turned them into flats and let them out at affordable rents. But that really wasn't an option for us because of the second home situation. Any old property that came up that could have been used for renovation was immediately snapped up at a price that we couldn't compete with. To give you an example, a small cottage in Appledore, if it's not on the seaward side, on the riverside, is now selling at something like £550,000, which is way over what any local person could afford. Four of us started it, and we had a farmer as one of our local farmers, one of our members who was keen, but he dropped out eventually, and we sort of searched throughout the village to see whether there was a brownfield site or a greenfield site that we could find. And eventually there was a sort of derelict field that was landlocked. There was no access to it from the road. But we knew the owner, and he was keen to sell it. And we paid £20,000 for the site, which a lot of people thought was probably twice as much as we should have paid because of its lack of accessibility. But anyway, we bought it. And that's when the fun started. As soon as we bought the site, there were petitions and objections coming from everyone, thinking that we were going to build homes or second homes or for open market prices at exorbitant prices, and accusations about that we were going to be profiteering, etc., etc. Obviously, the proof was in the pudding was when we completed the properties. We initially were in contact with a housing association who were keen to develop the site, and we had some plans drawn up, or they drew up the plans, etc. And it was a really optimistic and a really picturesque site that they designed. But however, when it came to the nitty-gritty, it turned out that the cost of developing the site was such that it would made none of the houses would have been able to be affordable. So unfortunately, they withdrew. Our site, by the way, is a very steep site and it overlooks the estuary. It's a fantastic view. Unfortunately, I haven't got any pictures that I can show you, but it is a particularly difficult site to develop. We also had the issue that we had to get permission to go across a car park, which was owned by another housing association, as it was, to get access to the site, and that took some doing and some persuading. We got there in the end. We got permission to go across the site, and we were then put in touch with another housing association called Asters. You may have come across them. They came and had a look at it, and they were keen to take part. They saw it as a particularly good site to develop in our area. Torridge District Council, which is our local district council, they were also very keen to assist us because I think their target for affordable housing at that time was pretty well zero. So they saw it as an advantage. So they helped us. Wessex Trust again helped us. They actually managed to get a grant for us for £10,000 to enable a proper feasibility study to be done before we went any further. And that feasibility study was carried out, and everything looked good. Asters were keen, as I said, to progress. So the next thing was the planning permission, which we applied for. Again, quite a few objections, not necessarily from Appledore people, but the strange thing is everybody pays lip service. We all need affordable housing. Oh yes, we all need affordable housing, but we can't have it here. And I'm sure everybody's been through that. Anyway, we eventually did get planning permission. Thanks to Torres District Council Planning Committee. They actually visited the site and looked at it, saw the benefits of it, and agreed it. The actual cost of the development, as a trust, I think we had £300 in the bank, and I think we've only still got £300 in the bank. But the actual cost of the development was £1.3 million. And that money, how we managed to do it, it came from, a third of it came from the district council, Torres District Council, a third from Homes England, and the other third came from Asters themselves. They actually put their own money into it from their market operations because they saw it as a flagship site to develop, which was brilliant. So a project was set up. When the funding was confirmed, the project was set up, and we worked with Asters, the builders, representative from the local residents association, and it took from 2017 through to 2018 to get the site developed. The first occupants went in August 2018, so they've just been over 3 years now there. One of the things that we were concerned about was the potential to lose the properties, but as a rural, although we're coastal, we're classified as a rural site, any property there was protected from the right to buy, which is one of the things that we were particularly keen on. The other thing is that we wanted it for Appledore people. So we wanted a restriction that if you had to live in the village for 30 years continuously before you were eligible, TDC weren't happy, sorry, that's Torres District Council, weren't happy with that. They thought it was slightly racist. So their norm was 10 years, but they agreed to compromise of 15 years. So we had that in the conditions. You had to be continuously living in the village for 15 years, had to be able to be eligible for one of the properties. There were 9 dwellings. There's 1 3-bedroom, 2 1-bedroom flats, and 6 2-bedrooms. We had done an exercise in conjunction with Devon County Council right at the beginning, and they did a survey. And at that time, and this is going back at 2009, that there were something like 48 families that were in need of this sort of property. When it came to the completion, and we advertised that the properties would be available, we had 253 applicants. I have to say that probably 130 of them weren't eligible because they hadn't lived in Appledore, and you can't blame people for trying. But we had a tremendous application. The Asters vetted them. We, as a CLT, had a veto, and we were advised of who the people were so that we could do our own investigations. And I'm pleased to say that the 9 dwellings are all Appledore people. They've all moved in. Nobody's moved out as yet. They're all quite happy with it over there. 1 or 2 have had additions to the family. So the problem for them is going to be, where can they go if these properties aren't suitable anymore, because the price of rents in the village is just outside of their ability, and that is going to be a problem. And that's basically it. We're down to the 3 original members. We had something like 30 supporters that helped us and joined in as members, but they didn't really want to take any active part. So it's down to the original 3 members now. Incidentally, we get an annual rent from these properties, ground rent of £1,870 a year. And as a CLT, what we're doing is giving that back to the village as grants for local organisations or whatever. If somebody wants something that benefits the people of Appledore, then that money will go back to them, because we don't need it. I have to say, after 10 years, I think in total, I think we're all a bit exhausted. So this, when asked, would you do another one? The answer at the moment is no. But the village needs it. But the problem is there isn't really anywhere it can happen. So that's it, really.
Thanks, Peter. That was actually going to be my first question about would you do another one, but it sounds like you're a bit burnt out after 10 years. But thank you so much for joining us and sharing your experiences. It's really good to hear of the partnership approach, I suppose, working with a housing association.
Yeah, it worked. They're brilliant. Yeah.
And especially I suppose the difficult site that you had. I'm sure there are many groups and communities across Wales that have these difficult sites that they need to really think about when developing houses. So thank you both. Really great to hear about your experiences. So we've got about sort of 10-15 minutes now for questions. If anybody wants to put anything in the chat, if you want to pop your hand up, or if you just want to unmute yourself and ask Peter or Andrew anything. Oh, we've got Chris. You see your hand up there?
Diolch yn fawr, Casey. Prynhawn da, pob. Great to be back at this forum again. Two really excellent presentations, really inspiring, and I can see, as you said, in relation to Peter, you know, trying to do this work is so difficult. Couple of questions for Andrew. You mentioned in perpetuity, which is of course key to this process of ensuring that these properties don't just become monopolised by the people who move in initially and then selling them on. Can you talk about how you ensure that in perpetuity principle remains? And then the second question is, as a land trust, are you quite unique in the fact that you're also an RSL? Because it's the first time I've come across an organisation that operates across the dual area of practice, if you like. Thank you very much.
Just unmute myself. Thank you, Chris. Well, two quite technical questions, really. One, the first, with regard to in perpetuity. Well, we're very different to, if you like, the normal developer that might be putting a planning application in. Most of them seek to resist 106 agreements, where in fact we demand them and require them, and are very keen to ensure that they are robust to deliver the community benefit purpose for which we were established. And in fact, it's quite ironic that when we get a planning permission for a project, we'll often get agents sending us letters and brochures telling us how they can assist us in reducing the numbers of affordables on our site and achieve a higher return. So they obviously don't look to investigate what type of organisation we are. So we know that. I mean, I often use the expression the planning system is fueled by greed rather than need, and well, perhaps a less inflammatory language would be fueled by private gain rather than public good. And the problem is that at every step that we take, we become acutely aware of the forces that are working very much against what I think probably all talking amongst friends today, you know, we're all trying to achieve. So the first thing that we're seeking to achieve is to get a legal agreement in place with the planning authority, which is attached to the planning permission, the section 106 agreement. I don't know how that varies in the governance structures in Wales, but certainly, unfortunately, for the time being, Cornwall is attached to a place called England. You may have heard of it, and where we have to abide by those rules for the time being. So we we seek to establish a strong 106 agreement which sets out very clearly the in perpetuity purpose, which fortunately Cornwall Council is equally keen to ensure as well. So we've got two people on either side of the fence, if you like, that we're seeking to achieve the same objectives. The second thing is that we also attach a covenant which sits, of course, on the transfer agreement with the land registry, on each of these the title deeds for each of the sites that we secure a permission, and so it becomes a kind of belt and braces around the in perpetuity objective. In those cases where I mentioned, Raymond, Dulo, and Landrake, where we've worked in partnership with a housing association, so they have, in those cases, taken the permission and built out the scheme and managed the properties. We own the freehold of the land, and because CLTs are, of course, there are no absolutes in this world, but we are more absolutely, if you like, not obliged, if you like, or are protected from right to buy. Of course, the housing associations are pleased with that as well, because it gives them a backstop that if we own the freehold, then we can offer sort of strong resistance to the risk of them losing those properties through right to buy in years to come. So when it comes to because obviously we manage the process of the resale of properties, where we were talking about discounted sale. So obviously when it comes to we handle about 3 or 4 resales a year. When it comes to those resales, they will, even if the occupants have forgotten or are unaware of their obligations when it comes to resale, as soon as they approach the conveyancing lawyer, the lawyer will of course seek the title deeds. The title deeds will have the transfer agreement on it, and it will be very clear to that lawyer to instruct that occupant to follow the rules as set down within the transfer agreement. Most of the occupants are aware of it, because we do levy a small, what we call, which I think is probably not the right word, but anyway, we call it a management fee, small management fee of £10 a month in most cases, which reminds them. I prefer to call it a covenant guarantee fee. Because that's in effect what it is. It's to ensure that we are there. We do give them other services as well, but we are there to handle the process for anyone that wishes to resell the property. But what they need to do is they need to, in most cases, it's written out very clear that they need to get a RICS, a Red Book valuation on the property. In some cases, it's 3 non-RICS valuations and take the average. And then if for example, it was in ROC and the resale value in the transfer agreement was in some cases 31% of the market value, we then draw a line, at 31% of that Red Book valuation, and make that property available, but only to people who are local to that area, who meet the purchase requirements in terms of both need and locality. And then we have to sign off and approve that the sale of the property. I mean, it has the other advantage, which of course, once you draw the line in the valuation, then there could be no gazumping beyond it either. So it kind of creates a kind of more stable environment in which a less frenzied environment in which sales can happen as well. Sorry, that's a rather long explanation.
Sorry, just quickly, Andrew,
yeah.
That was brilliant. That's explained it perfectly. So basically, just to give an example, so if someone invests heavily in the property, that will be reflected, that investment will be reflected in 31%.
That is right, yes. And whenever anyone, because we've had some who want to invest by extending the property, for which they have to get permission from us, or building into the loft space, anything of that nature, they are required. I mean, apart from in most cases, but to a lesser extent these days, to get planning permission, we do remind them each year that if they do undertake any significant investments in their property, they're supposed to seek authority from us to do so. Obviously, the intention is not to allow them to extend or improve the property to such a point that actually, even at the 31%, that it takes the value of the property beyond the reach of subsequent purchasers. But what they do and do need to understand is that, of course, any investment that they put into the property, they need to bear in mind that whatever the percentage of the resale value, so they'll be selling the whole property, and they can't be, they can't enhance just the value of the property on the basis of the investment that they put into the extension. Therefore, unlike other people who extend their properties, they run the risk of not being able to recoup the full value of their investment. So there is the downside on that in that respect. Yeah. With regard to your second question about a registered provider, I'm sorry. Yes, so for those people who don't know, so we're a registered provider, have been for what, nearly 2 years now. And at the same time, we registered with Homes England as an investment partner as well. Yeah, there aren't that many CLTs that have done that, and I think that we're probably the only umbrella CLT that has done it. I mean, there are others. Called a Vale, there's another beer in Devon, have become registered providers as well as local CLTs. We are I suppose as far as I'm aware, we're the only umbrella CLT that actually supports local CLTs, and then also we operate in our own right. So I mean, in effect, our approach to life is that we encourage communities to establish their own CLTs in the same way as that Peter has described in Appledore. And where that community doesn't either feel it has the confidence or the energy or whatever to go ahead and do that, what we do is we act as the de facto CLT in the area, and we set up a housing working party which operates as if it were a CLT. In other words, making the same decisions, but without taking the risks. We take the risks on their behalf. So it's either CLT or housing working party approach. But obviously, we then kind of carry the project ourselves rather than stand as professionals supporting the local community, a local CLT, taking the project through on its own behalf. But yeah, the answer to your question is it's rare, but we're not the only ones.
Thanks both. I think we could probably have a session in itself for both of those topics, so we can bear that in mind for future. I think Jill had her hand up, and also Leonie. So if I go to Jill first, then Leonie, and we've also got a couple of questions in the chat if we've got time. So Jill, do you want to unmute yourself? Or should we go to Leonie first, and then perhaps Jill, if you unmute yourself, and then you can ask your question, or pop it in the chat if you're having difficulties. Leonie?
Yeah, for me, it's really something that Andrew touched on. This issue of building capacity quickly, because at the moment I'm in a different situation. I'm in urban Swansea. But I'm seeing all these amazing properties that would be perfect for co-housing being snapped up at prices that are way beyond our capacity. And when some come up that are really suitable, they often get sold before they even hit the market. And then I've certainly seen and once attended some years ago courses that help people develop housing for profit very quickly. And of course, if you've got a background in as carpentry or in trades. So I'm seeing all these people buying all these properties that would be brilliant for keeping in the community. And it's like we're way behind because we are doing it, it's such a complex area. I mean, just thinking planning, let alone the actual detail of renovating these. And Swansea Co-housing is committed to sustaining the character of the place through looking after restoring existing buildings. And yeah, I just feel like we haven't got a hope of catching up, that there's this tsunami happening that is just overtaking us. And it's almost like we're just not very good at building capacity very quickly and sharing knowledge quickly so that we can maximize community benefit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just to try and kind of address what is an issue which isn't unique to co-housing, but to any community-led approach where you're addressing a need, a housing need, and you don't have a lot of resources to do that with. I mean, finding development partners who share your objectives is one route, and that might be a local authority or the diocese having some glebe land, or other charitable or community trust organizations that have surplus property, and so putting a call out amongst organizations that might share your values and give you the time. You can then enter into an option agreement. I mean, most of the projects that we deliver, particularly from new build, the vast majority we establish an option agreement, which at least is a legally binding agreement, which gives us the time. Usually it's at least 2 years to pursue all of the pre-development costs. The pre-development costs on a new build site can be anything from £50,000 to £100,000 just to get to a viable planning permission, and to invest that amount of money, is high risk, and you couldn't possibly do it without a legal undertaking with the landowner, the property owner, because otherwise they would walk off at any moment and flog it to the highest, to someone else who would give them a lot more than we've agreed in the option agreement. So that's one route down which you can go. I mean, some co-housing groups, the one advantage that they have, particularly if they're not addressing housing need, and I'm not saying that they don't, but in cases where simply the co-housing, the mutual benefit ethos is there, and each of the members has at least some capital to bring. And there are a couple of good examples in Cornwall, is that the one advantage which the co-housing movement has over others is that actually you do get a lot more property for your money if you're buying, say, a farm with outbuildings, or a large house which otherwise developers would subdivide into lots of separate houses, which would be sold off at a very high price. Whereas if a co-housing community can buy those types of properties, in which you could get 8 to 10, 12 living units, it's been shown that you do get very good value in those circumstances, but only if you can move quickly, with a large amount of capital. So those that can kind of are not addressing a housing need and don't need to go through the more kind of ponderous processes that obviously public funding needs to go through. can act quickly as a group of who can bring capital from the sales of their own properties or other capital, then they can do it in that form. But obviously we don't because we're a charitable organisation, we can't help those kind of organisations because they can't, kind of stipulate that they're addressing a local housing need. And indeed, the latest one that's gone ahead in Cornwall, I think that half of the people who moved into the properties didn't live in Cornwall beforehand, but are now living in a co-housing community in Cornwall. And so, we're kind of barred from assisting them. We're not criticising them or discouraging them. We're obliged not to help them.
Thanks both. We're sort of going over our allotted time for Q&As, but I think it's probably useful. I think there's a question that applies to both of you really in terms of the pros and cons of having a very local community trust, like in your case, Peter, to having then that bigger county-wide trust. So can either of you sort of summarise the pros and cons that you see of each of your projects, I suppose?
Well, as far as the Appledore CLT is concerned, there wasn't really ever any consideration in it being anything other than the local village. That's where the problem was. We are all local people, born and bred here, and we didn't have the expertise or the foresight to think about going further than our village. So and as I said, that was traumatic enough. We would probably, if we could find the land and we could find the money and have the support like we had before, we probably would do it, because the people that are in there and also the general community in Appledore now appreciate what affordable housing is about and what it can achieve. So it was well worth the project. I know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just two very different approaches. I mean, when Cornwall Community Land Trust was established, it was established as a project actually alongside one of the smaller rural housing associations, Cornwall Rural Housing Association, and because there was a feeling that there was a need for a stronger community-led approach, and one that was able to support the establishment of organisations like Appledore, and indeed, the 12 that have been established in Cornwall. I think we may have reached saturation point as far as new CLTs at the moment. There are a couple of locations which are currently considering it, but I think most of them, when they look at the projects which we've delivered, are kind of anxious to kind of get cracking and don't want to be held back by the kind of rather laborious registration and governance processes that they need to go through, which Peter was referring to earlier, and would rather crack on with the housing project and consider the governance issues later on if the Housing Working Party wants to convert to a CLT. So we're very happy to do it on that basis if communities want to do it. I mean, either way, there's no better time than now if you want to kind of get on and do a project. I mean, most of the projects that we are delivering, they can be done quickly, although I have to say, I don't know how long it was in Appledore, but say in Rhannu, as Andrew Prendergast may remember from his time down here, we're only just finally finishing it now, and that probably goes back about 7 years, in terms from origins to the final completion of the property. It doesn't need to be that long, but sometimes it is. I'm afraid to say.
And a subsequent question, I suppose, from Llyr in the chat is for you specifically, Andrew. I think have you, from the properties that you've developed by the CLT, have you used that resource to raise capital for new projects? So would it be possible to raise capital by lending against existing community resources? So I think Llyr has got an idea of sort of pooling together community assets, and Llyr, feel free to jump in if you are still here, and sort of borrow against that to provide affordable housing. Is that something that you've considered down in Cornwall?
We don't have a lot of collateral, but we do now that we have the 6 homes, which adds to a very small stock that we had previously. And now that since we've become an RP, obviously we do have the opportunity to do that. And so it does mean that we can go to other lenders and we do then clearly have collateral which then reassures those lenders. But I would say it's more to do with the track record, really. I mean, our finance partners are partners like the Charity Save Foundation, Venturesome Charity Save Foundation Bank, the Charity Bank, Ecology Building Society. In fact, are the building society that we have our long-term loan that we're a minor with, and they'll be very pleased that we achieved EPC A on those properties. So we and I think that what really works, rather than as much as I think that the collateral works, is past successes of working with lenders who have, alongside whom you then build confidence that you can deliver projects, deliver them. I can't really say we deliver them on time, because that's not always within our gift, but certainly delivering them on budget, which obviously is something which we're very, very determined to do on every occasion. So that we can kind of prove viability as the project is delivered, and then we can move on to the next one, and that lender then has confidence in us. I think that probably counts for more than actually having capital. I mean, we do generate a small amount of what might call, obviously, as all charities can't operate at a loss. It's a high wire act to achieve break-even point. So it's better to work towards achieving an annual surplus, which is what we try to do, and then some of that surplus we put aside, and we refer to that as working capital, which we then use to help us with our pre-development costs on projects, and use that as a revolving fund, which helps us move into new projects. But mostly, the funds that we do have can only really contribute towards the pre-development costs. We haven't got millions in the bank that we can fund actual developments with, sadly.
Great, thank you. And then there's a final couple of questions for Peter around so the 9 houses, so the people that moved into the new properties, what happened to the 9 houses in the villages that the residents left? Were they all in social housing, which went to folks on the waiting list? And Alan was asking a question about the land purchase. So where did the money come from the land purchase, and how did you get it back? It must have been quite a risk to take. Sorry, a couple of questions to throw at you there.
Okay, no problem. The question about were there therefore nine empty other properties in Appledore? Regrettably, no. I think from memory, at least 6 of the people were living with parents in the parents' home, and 3 of them were in local authority social housing. So yes, so the 3 of them would have been therefore available, although pre-social housing. One of them had been privately sold. It was a private house, so two of them would have been social housing, the rest not. How did we afford the purchase price, 20,000 purchase price? We were very fortunate that someone lent us interest-free £20,000, which was secured against the site. And then when we signed the lease to Astor's, it was a 130-year lease. The premium for that lease was the £20,000, so that we could repay our loan. So we owe nobody anything, and as with the Cornish site, we own the freehold of the site. So it's there in perpetuity for the people of Appledore.
Great, thank you very much. Well, thank you so much both. I know that you've got to shoot off now while we go into a couple of breakout rooms and just have a brief discussion. Obviously, you are more than welcome to stick around, but I know obviously Andrew's got some new properties to hand over, and Peter, you're really busy as well. So just really wanted to say a quick thank you, diolch yn fawr iawn, for joining us today. It's been really great to hear about your projects, and hopefully we can come down to you guys one day and talk about some projects that we've helped to develop in areas with high second home ownership.
Okay, thank you, Casey. Anytime.
Thank you very much.
Rest of you.
Thank you.